Lily, thank you so much for that beautiful music. Good evening, everyone. We invite each of you to consider using the rename function to share your class year, your parent years, your faculty role, or the place that you're calling from. We have deliberately set this event in the meeting platform so that we're able to see each other for the sense of community and fellowship this evening. We invite you to keep your camera on for that purpose, and we respect your decision if you choose not to. We ask that everyone please keep yourself on mute in order to maximize the sound for our speakers. And finally, please keep your setting on speaker's view. Should you have any questions about anything I just said, please feel free to chat me directly for technical support throughout the evening. My name is Jenny Savino, and I have both the pleasure and the privilege of serving Andover as the Director of Alumni Engagement. Tonight's community includes alumni, students, faculty, staff, parents, and friends. You are from 30 different states, 10 countries, and 5 continents. This is the Andover family. This evening's program will conclude with a musical performance as we opened by Lily Lewis, class of '93. Lily is a pianist, singer, composer, band leader, and public speaker. Lily, we look forward to hearing your music again at the conclusion of the program. As we open this evening's program, I would like to start with gratitude for the Af-Lat-Am Alumni Committee of Alumni Council, who planned this evening in partnership with Linda Carter-Griffith and the Office of Associate Head of School for Equity, Inclusion, and Wellness, LaShawn Springer, and the Office of Community and Multicultural Development, our office, the Office of Alumni Engagement, and the Alumni Council. The Af-Lat-Am Committee is a passionate group of volunteers, and I would like to recognize them. The inaugural committee members are co-chairs Nick Olmel, class of '98, and Terry Stroud, '88. Members include Terry Alexander, class of 2000, Malika Bundy, class of '88, Carolyn Chica, class of '08, Ruben Diaz, class of '84, Alba Disla, class of '15, Willie Ivy, class of '68, Tiffany Joseph, class of 2000, Ajite Nyadro, class of '03, and Franco Torres, class of '96. To each of you, I say thank you. At this time, I welcome founding president of what we know as the Af-Lat-Am Society at Andover, Willie Ivy, class of '68. Willie?
Thank you, Jenny. On behalf of the Af-Lat-Am Committee of the Alumni Council, I would like to extend a warm welcome to each of you and to thank you for attending tonight's program. This promises to be an exceptional evening. In the 50+ years since the founding of Af-Lat-Am, much has changed in our country and much has stayed the same. Our schools and our neighborhoods are more segregated than ever. People of color continue to be victimized by a system of justice that sees them as guilty until proven innocent. Around the country, police continue to act as judge, jury, and executioner in situations involving people of color. Some significant changes have occurred, however. We elected the country's first African-American president. In 2020, we elected the first woman of color as the vice president. After the election of Barack Obama, I believe that the nation had reached a turning point in its efforts to deal with race. Unfortunately, the nation turned in the wrong direction. The most serious consequence of this turn was the election of Donald Trump. During the Trump years, racism stepped out of the shadows and became a driving force in American politics. Once again, it has become a major underpinning threat. Minorities voted in record numbers. Because of this, faced with challenging times as Republican legislatures attempt to disenfranchise minority voters based upon the big lie. In some cases, they are attempting to give themselves the power to overturn election results if they dislike the choice of the people. This is perhaps the greatest threat to the American democracy since the Civil War. There is, however, some hope on the horizon. The recent conviction of Derek Chauvin demonstrates ethnic. It is this coalition of people that is needed to right the ship. I believe that each of us has a role to play going forward if we are to put this nation on the right course. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to my fellow committee member, Alba Diesla.
Thank you so much, Willie. As Willie mentioned, my name is Alba Diesla. I'm from Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I graduated from Andover in 2015. And I'm also a member of the Af-Lat-Am Alumni Committee. I'm so excited to be here with you all today to honor a very, very special person. So to begin, I want to start with a short visualization exercise, and you can feel free to close your eyes for a moment. You can really get into it. I want you all to picture where you feel most at home and where you are most at ease and peaceful and maybe even a little inspired. Is it your bedroom? Is it a reading nook in your home? Maybe it's by the beach and it's away from your everyday responsibilities. Alternatively, sometimes where you feel the most comfortable is not like a physical location, but it's around certain people. And those people let you leave your mask or your facade at the door and let you be your whole self. For many Andover students and alumni, here enters none other than LaShawn Springer. And admittedly, I still have some trouble adjusting to calling her anything other than Miss Springer, but here we are, despite being almost 6 years out. Simply put, to know Miss Springer is to love her. Over the past 6 years as CAMD director, Miss Springer has touched countless students' lives and undeniably enriched the Andover community for years to come. In addition to her real-life trend-setting and show-stopping wardrobe, Miss Springer has worn numerous hats at Andover. Just a peek at the list reveals her roles as CAMD director, college counselor, fashion inspo, club advisor, life coach, friend, and your go-to hype woman and cheerleader. Whether she's bringing in famous authors and social justice advocates for hard-hitting conversations, or holding space for students when the world is just too much, you can bet that Miss Springer will go above and beyond to make sure her students feel included and at home. During my last couple of years at Andover, Miss Springer was my college counselor, and the club advisor for Af-Lat-Am and the newly formed Sisterhood Club. She helped me reflect deeply on where I wanted to spend the next 4 years of my academic career. And I could tell by her attention to detail and the quality of her questions that she really did care about my future. She knew me as a student and as a leader on campus, and always reminded me to pursue the places that aligned with my values and interests and not go for the title or prestige of the school. She made me feel as if I were her only student. And she applied that same attention and dedication in 2013 to the group of students who wanted to start the Sisterhood Club, which is a space for Black and brown girls, faculty, and staff to come together to learn from each other and just be themselves. She drove us to Lawrence for local productions of For Colored Girls, hosted our first ever glamping adventure at the cabin on campus, and always showed up for us on top of all of her other responsibilities. And that's still only part of the magic of Miss Springer. Her ability to make anyone in her presence feel truly seen and heard, regardless of the circumstance, is one of her greatest qualities. When asked about their favorite memories with Miss Springer, members of the class of 2019 and 2020 mentioned that it was hard to pick just one, feeling like they could be 100% themselves when around her, especially on the hardest days. When real life events would burst the campus bubble, Miss Springer showed up as both a listening ear and as an advocate for her most vulnerable students. She made what can be an alienating and stressful environment feel warm and welcoming. Healy, from the class of 2019, paints the picture perfectly. She said, "Because of Miss Springer, I understood what it meant to have adults who care about you and make you feel safe." Thank you so much for sharing that, Keely. Miss Springer, thank you for the past 6 years of love and care that you've poured into this role, and for helping to make CAMD a place of learning, bonding, and healing. As CAMD director, you served as a role model for so many students, especially the young Black girls on campus who admire you and remembered to walk as if they have a crown on their head, as Abigail, class of 20, recalls, because she saw you walking on the paths with your head held high. In addition to the unforgettable speaker events, workshops, symposiums, and more that you've organized during your tenure, your legacy is reminding people of their magic. And while I could go on for hours, I could be here all day, I'll end with a quote by the late Maya Angelou that my mom always comes back to. The quote goes, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Thank you, Miss Springer, for always feeling like home. And I'll now pass it off to Malika to introduce our next speakers.
Thank you, Abla. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce first my classmate, Terry Stroud, class of 1988. Ms. Stroud hails from the Bronx and is a proud and active member of the Andover class of 1988. She serves as one of the co-chairs of the Af-Lat-Am Alumni Association Committee of the Andover Alumni Council. Professionally, Terry holds an important position in an important agency as the General Counsel for the DC Board of Elections. She holds the designation of Certified Elections Registration Administrator, the highest in the field of voter registration and election administration. Her work in support of the democratic process has also taken her to Kosovo, where she served as a consultant volunteer, and Egypt, where she served as an observer, both efforts supporting historic elections in those countries. Terry is also active in her community, where she founded the 5,000, a food pantry in DC, providing food for approximately 100 individuals and families every month. She is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and in the Andover community also serves as a class co-secretary for the class of 1988. Terry received her bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her JD from Georgetown University Law Center. Terry is joined this evening by our keynote speaker and esteemed guest, New York Times bestselling author and chair of Princeton's Department of African American Studies, Dr. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. Dr. Glaude was born in Moss Point, Mississippi, and attended Morehouse College, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King. He received a master's degree in African American Studies from Temple University and a doctorate from Princeton in religion, where he is the James S. McDonnell Distinguished University Professor and Chair of the Department of African American Studies. He is a frequent contributor in media through outlets like MSNBC, NBC, and NBC on programs such as Meet the Press. He is a columnist for the Time magazine, and his voice is also heard as host for Princeton's African American Studies podcast, discussing African American studies and the Black experience in the 21st century. As a highly accomplished and respected scholar of religion, he is a former president of the American Academy of Religion and has written books on religion, philosophy, and race. His most recent, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. He joins us today as a powerful and respected voice, able to inspire and convene conversations on topics like tonight's Confronting Our Challenges, a community discussion on the future of race relations. Welcome, Terry, Dr. Glaude.
Thank you.
I think the phrase of the last 2 years is you're on mute. So thank you, Dr. Glaude, for joining our community in this discussion of the future of race relations. We're so happy to have you.
Sure.
It seems like this event took forever to come, but we're finally here and we're all so excited. Before I get into our questions, I wanted to let you know that Chris Leggett is here. Chris Leggett wanted to give you a shout out. He sends a nice message and his love to you, and just is very appreciative of your presence here. Chris serves on our Andover Board of Trustees, and so wanted to acknowledge that connection. And he says hi.
Yeah, I saw him. I saw
you
him.
saw
Terry.
him?
I wanted to see how I could say a message to him, but he's so. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate you. Good to see you, Doc.
Yeah. So again, thank you. We've got a lot to talk about, particularly in light of the events of this past week, which we'll get into. But I wanted to start and ask you to sort of center us on what I think is the prize. I want you to center us on James Baldwin's vision for us, for American society, what he referred to as the New Jerusalem so frequently. What did that vision look like for Baldwin? What does it look like for you?
Where every human being, no matter their station in life, could be affirmed in their choices and their dreams and aspirations, would be accorded dignity and standing, such that they could, reach for the kind of life that would be worthy of the two breaths that have meaning. And what I mean by those two breaths that have meaning, there's the first one and then there's the last one. And what you do with what happens in between. Baldwin says that he wanted us to do something unprecedented, to imagine a self without the need for enemies, which is so amazing on a certain level, right? But in order for that to happen, America has to grow up, though. Mm-hmm. That's the key. The precondition is that America has to leave behind its adolescence that allows it to secure its innocence and to evade its ugliness. But I think that's, at the end of the day, the world that he imagines, the content of that New Jerusalem, is a place where not only we can dream dreams, but we can make those dreams a reality. Does that make sense, Tim?
That makes absolute sense. I mean, and it seems like who wouldn't want that? But the reality is that there have been barriers along the way in this country since its founding that have impeded our progress in terms of realizing that society, that state of being in the world. And in Begin Again, you discuss some of the barriers that keep us from reaching that New Jerusalem. You discuss the lie as well as the value gap, a concept that you introduced in Democracy in Black. And I would, ask you to talk about those concepts and the way that they've operated historically to sort of block our progress along the road to New Jerusalem.
Yeah, Baldwin wrote an essay entitled The White Problem in 1964. And I'm going to paraphrase the passage, but he basically says the Christians who founded the nation had a fatal flaw. They had to reconcile their imagining of the new world with the role that the chattel played in their lives. Right? In order to do that, these men and women, these chattel, had to be denied their humanity. They had to say that they were not really men and women. And then Baldwin says, because if they were men and women, if they were not men and women, then no crime would have been committed. You hear that language? You see the move?
Yeah.
And then he says, that lie is the basis of our present trouble. So we've told ourselves a set of lies about why certain people are denied standing and dignity, why we have built a society that actually reflects a different kind of valuation of human being, because the lie is told to justify what I've called the value gap. And the value gap is this belief that white people matter more than others. And that belief evidences itself in our social, political, and economic arrangements. And it distorts our character such that we can't become the kinds of persons that democracies require, you see. So I don't believe, for example, that America's original sin is slavery. I don't believe America's original sin is the genocide of Native peoples. I believe America's original sin is the greed and the belief that white people matter more than others that made genocide and slavery possible. So it's not just ours, it's actually our inheritance, as it were. We just articulated in a way that the modern world had never seen before. So, in some ways, that belief, those practices, those lies, right, have allowed us to secure our innocence in the face of what we've done, right? And Baldwin would say that our refusal to confront that history honestly has made us monstrous. And I think he's right.
So these concepts of the lie and the value gap have been sort of a through line, I think, that you would say throughout our history, and it shows up in various contexts. And what I wanted to get to now was how it shows up specifically in the context of policing and law enforcement in light of the events that happened this week and the verdict that was handed down, which is a good thing, and we all rejoiced about it. But there were indicators throughout this week that we're not where we need to be. And so talk about how the value gap and the lie show up within that specific context.
Right. So I think policing is so vexed because it takes us to the heart of the contradiction, you see. And oftentimes we want to tell the story about policing having its origins in slave patrols and the like, and that's an important story to tell, right? But we don't have to go back that far. We can talk about the 20th century just generally, right? And what we know is that until 1954, formally, the US was a hair-invoked democracy, right? The late Judith Sklar says that America didn't become a genuine democracy. She's a political theorist at Harvard, said that we didn't become a genuine democracy until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So what you have is a conception of policing aimed at serving and protecting a particular community that imagines itself as more valued than others, and another community that is policed in such a way that it is to be contained and surveilled, right? Limited in its movement, right? To be, shall we say, policed in how they navigate space. So just to give you a sense, right, that even a march, I'm getting tired. So when I get tired, my students usually say I start doing this, start looking all over the place, right?
Oh, you're fine, you're fine.
But even, just think about it, even marching wasn't considered a kind of transgressive act because of the very way in which space was organized. So Black bodies moving, right, even in a disciplined way, constitutes a subversive and potentially transgressive and potentially subversive act. So you have a form of policing designed, right, to sustain a hierarchy of meaning that has been assigned generically to human bodies. You see? So what happens when those people then clamor for broad-based inclusion? The police, the repressive state apparatus is deployed to contain them, right? Even in the Kerner Commission report, which declares, two Americas, nestled in the back of the report are all of this stuff about policing precisely because of the urban uprisings that in some ways put in place the kind of, the infrastructure of what would become modern policing. The Safe Streets Act of 1968. Baldwin refers to it in his book, No Name in the Street, as this draconian measure driven by white fear. I'm going to get to your point. So you see, so policing emerges for the first part of the 20th century out of a society that is organized along the lines of the value gap. Once community is treated or imagined, we serve, we protect. Another community, we contain, we police, we surveil, right? So then we tell ourselves lies to justify this. They're prone to criminality. They're morally degenerate. They represent in some ways a potential contagion outside of an exploited labor force, right? That threatens the very, foundations of American democracy. So we view Black men as aggressive, right? We view Black children not as children, but as potential threats, right? And so the very stereotype, the very discursive practice around Black bodies then justifies a certain kind of policing that actually has its origins in the different valuation, you see. So it's not our doing, it's their fault that necessitates this form of policing. Value gap, lies that justify. Then you come up with discursive frames, law and order. Law and order is not Nixon's invention, by the way. Law and order actually emerged in the context of democratic political frameworks in response to Black civil disobedience. So you hear the language of law and order initially in the South, right? As people are engaging in nonviolent action, right? As they're trying to dismantle Jim Crow. So law and order becomes the justification for, again, Black communities being over-policed, over-surveilled, right? Contained and underprotected. Law and order then becomes the frame for what? The war on drugs. Both of which accelerates a society that becomes basically a carceral state. You know this, you're a lawyer, right? Where carcerality becomes, right, a central feature of this democratic society. We lock up people more than any other industrialized nation in the world, right? That war on drugs then feeds into being tough on crime, and that defines policing. I'm trying to get to somewhere here. Walk with me. So tough on crime, law and order as the general frame, war on drugs, tough on crime, then shapes the way policing evolves. Mass incarceration, militarization of the police, and that policing carries with it a certain form of violence vis-a-vis these communities in which there's a constant, consistent violation of civil liberties, stop and frisk, da-da-da-da. I mean, we forget about ramparts in LA. We don't talk about the black box in Chicago. Forms of policing that carry with it humiliation, violence, containment, carcerality, right? And the interesting thing is that the country stood by and watched it happen for generations. The majority of urban unrest in this country close to 95% of urban unrest has been a result of police violence directed against Black bodies, Black people, right? The majority of quote unquote riots were sparked by police encounters, you see. So this is at the heart of a system of policing. And what we do is that we clutch our pearls when it results in somebody being killed. But that's actually the consequence of a form of policing that happens every single day. I use this example during the summer when the protests broke out after George Floyd's murder, after we watched 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Initially it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right? And you saw in New York, I said this on Nicole Wallace. I said, bracket the tear gas, bracket the rubber bullets, pay attention to the aggression. Look at how the police are treating these young white people, these old white progressives, or these old, the multicultural, multiracial nature of the protests. Look at how they are engaging them. And they said, okay, I said, that's how Black communities and brown communities and poor communities are policed every single day. When we look at what happened to Lieutenant Nazaria in Virginia, right? Even when he declared he was afraid, what did the police officer say?
You should be.
You should be. Aggression. What was the objective? Humiliation. What happens when you're tired of it? Death. Dave Henderson put it this way. You can't win. That's what the 61-year-old bystander said to George Floyd. Remember? You can't win. And George Floyd said, I'm not trying to. And this is what Dave Henderson said. He said, you can't win when you beg for mercy. You can't win when you tell them that you're afraid. You beg for mercy, that's George Floyd. You tell them you're afraid, that's Lieutenant Nazaria. You follow instructions, that's Adam Toledo. It's a form of policing that has at its root an assumption of who's valued, has as its root violence and a host of lies to make it all seem reasonable. That's a long-winded answer, but I think I had to do that.
No, I think it's absolutely complete. And I think, so what's the first step that can happen now so that we go in the direction of addressing the manifestation of the lie and the value gap within the context of policing? I know there's the George Floyd Act, so certainly that's something, but what else can be done in terms of how communities can respond?
Well, we're beginning to see the translation into modern political language of what we actually meant, what activists actually meant by defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
So during the election cycle, people were worried that defund the police would allow Republicans or whomever to make arguments that these people aren't supporting police and they want to abolish the police and the like. When in fact, there is an argument around abolition, but defund the police isn't necessarily an argument around abolition. What it was really about was how municipalities, allocate resources.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean that the majority of police killings are rooted in responses to mental health episodes, to domestic questions and the like, dealing with children, traffic stops, and actually nonviolent encounters in so many ways, right? And so part of what we're beginning to see is the conversation happening in local spaces. You see it in New York, you saw it in LA, you saw it in Minnesota, where city government is actually making decisions about, well, do we need to invest this much money in policing when we can start investing in the root causes, right, of certain kinds of disturbances? So that's one thing. But at a more abstract level, what we're seeing is the collapse of the age of Reagan and its various pillars. And what do I mean by that? And again, my politics are clear, but I'm just trying to be descriptive here.
Yep.
So the elements of the age of Reagan, or neoliberalism or Thatcherism, however you want to describe it,
Mhm.
But one had to do with, right, a wholesale attack on the role of government in our lives. So big government was necessarily bad. And part of what we wanted to do, or Reagan wanted to do, was to expand the role of markets, right, in our everyday lives, right? So we get public-private partnerships and a range of things. But the idea is bad, big government's bad, bad, bad. It's an intrusion on liberty. Da, da, da. COVID-19 has revealed the lie of that argument.
Yeah.
We've seen that government has to have a role, play a role in our lives. Well, what's another feature? Well, tax cuts, right? Tax policy. I mean, George H.W. Bush in 1979 called Ronald Reagan's economic philosophy voodoo economics. Right?
Class of 41 or 42, I believe, by the way.
Okay,
here.
all right, there you go. But he called it voodoo economics, right? And remember, many people thought that Reagan was the representative of the Goldwater ring of the Republican Party, and folk believed that he was going to actually cause World War III,
Yeah.
right? They thought he was a nut, as it were. But you know, Reaganism became the frame. But tax policy has produced what Alan Greenspan called, as he left the Fed, right, a wealth gap that's unsustainable, that threatens the very foundation of American democracy. Even Barack Obama, in his last remarks, said the biggest threat to democracy actually is the divide between the haves and the have-nots. So tax policy, bankrupt, right? Another feature involved of Reaganism, and I'm going to bracket his foreign policy, was racial dog whistling, a kind of appeal to white grievance, white hatreds, and white fears. Well, that dalliance has metastasized and overrun the party. And we've seen its effects across the board. One of the effects of this appeal to white grievance and white fear was a discourse around law and order, a discourse around welfare reform, around, you know, I mean, remember Reagan gave us the welfare queen, right? This sort of thing, right? And so what we are seeing in this momentary is in some ways the erosion of those elements, or the collapse of those elements. And we're trying to figure out what will replace it. So the kind of foundational or ideological framing for a certain kind of policing is collapsing right in front of our eyes. And the question or the challenge is, what kinds of languages, what sort of frame will emerge to replace it? This is why this moment is so critical, right? So that's a long-winded way of just kind of running a John Dewey argument about the eclipse of Publix and all this stuff that he wrote in Public and His Problems in 1927. But anyway.
All of which I've read. So we're going to switch gears from the law enforcement context and bring it closer to home. In recent years, after Floyd's murder in particular, there was a widespread call for all kinds of institutions to re-examine the role that institutional racism plays in every aspect of American life. And of course, schools and educational institutions have not been immune from that, and nor should they have been. You know, schools such as, you know, ours, Andover, and yours, Princeton, have been called upon to re-examine and reimagine their approaches to diversity, equity, inclusion at every level, including in terms of policies, staffing, curriculum, et cetera. And I just want to say, it's been awesome to see how students and alumni, young students and young alumni in particular, at this institution have, from every quarter, as we like to say at Andover, have really been leading the charge to ask the hard questions and challenge the academy to do the work of examining where we can do better. So we have several questions around this issue, and I'm going to incorporate some questions from faculty, staff, parents, students. The first one is it's a combination of questions from Corey Martin, faculty at Andover, and Kimberly Ramos, class of 2002. And they collectively asked, what guidance or advice would you give to institutions such as Andover with their complicated histories of racial, gendered, classist, and other forms of discrimination that are seeking to dismantle their problematic foundations and do better? And a related question is from Jonathan Rivas, class of '06. What would restorative justice look like at these institutions?
Yeah. So let me say something up front. You know, just because I run my mouth for a living doesn't mean I have all the answers, right? So we just want to be clear.
Yeah.
You know, I hate
I
civil
don't
rights
believe it,
leaders.
but yes, go ahead.
No, I'm serious. I hate civil rights leaders and pundits who just they think they can answer everything, right? And they do it with certainty. You know, I want to admit that I don't have the answers, but I have some thoughts, some intuitions, and I want them to be treated as such, right? So one of the insidious features of the value gap isn't the loud racist that proclaims that white people matter more than others. It's actually the way in which it can lead those who claim to be liberal to approach racial justice as a philanthropic enterprise, as a charitable gesture, as something that they do for someone. Jimmy Baldwin says, I'm skeptical of people who want to do something for me as opposed to with me. So part of the challenge in this moment is to reconsider.
Sort of, they want to do things about us without us.
Yeah, we become projects or objects. Did y'all hear that? We become projects or objects of concern. What happens when we approach these questions in this way, we don't actually reimagine the very foundations of the institution. So the institution remains normatively white, and then it tinkers around the edges. It's like we're a white neighborhood and we're allowing one black person to move into the house, into the neighborhood. We remain a white neighborhood, a predominantly white neighborhood, but we'll smatter some difference in there, but we are who we are, you see. So what does it mean for Andover and Princeton to reimagine itself in light of its history, but as an institution that is not just simply beholden to its past, but is a 21st century institution? That is, it is an institution that reflects, right, the broad diversity of the country at large. Well, first thing it has to do is shift its conception of itself as a white institution, which means it has to admit that that's what it is. Admitting that is a very difficult thing. Instead, the way in which we approach it is, let's go find charitable cases and admit, you see, and then pat ourselves on the back and expect the coin for those Black and brown students and others to be gratitude and expressions of joy that we are at least trying. That's not a fundamental transformation. So the first thing we have to do is to understand the relationship between the loud racist and those who view racial equality as a philanthropic gesture. Both reproduce a framework that still holds that some people possess equality to give to others. Who are you to give it to me? It's not yours to give. Huh? So we have to break that from the beginning. Once we break that, now we open ourselves up to a different kind of imagining. What does it mean to think about Princeton, right, as a place that aims to reflect the complexity of the world in which it inhabits? To take its $1 billion to $6 billion, something like that, dollar endowment with this small campus, Chris knows about this, with this small campus, because it doesn't have a med school, it doesn't have a law school, it got all that money. That's why these Princeton undergrads are strange, Chris, right? Have all that money, right? What does it mean to think about admissions, staff? What does it mean to think about the culture of the street, to reimagine Princeton. I remember speaking to it's a group of old Princetonians, the folks who have Princeton in their will. And they had me go speak to them. And I said, I'm Princeton. That was my opening remark. I'm Princeton. Now, what are we going to do about that? Right? It's going to change the way we fundraise. It's going to change because some of us don't have inherited wealth. What does it mean to continue to produce classes of folk that are from diverse backgrounds? It's going to change how you imagine, raising money. It's going to change a range of things. You got to reimagine the institution in so many different ways. I can go on and on, but that's the beginning of an answer. And then how do we leverage our power in relation to people who do business with us? Right. So I've suggested to Princeton, you have to, if you're serious, what's your moonshot? If you're serious, what's your moonshot? When Princeton answered me initially, I said, y'all just landed on the top of Nassau Hall. That ain't no moonshot. What's that? Right? What does it mean to fundamentally commit yourselves to an entering class that looks like the country? Amherst did it before the collapse, the economic collapse, and before COVID, they did it. What does it mean to commit oneself to literally hiring faculty, right, across the country, right, that are diverse faculty, that's at the top of their game, and not just expect African-American studies to be the source of your diversification? Huh? What does that look like? What does it mean to have staffs? There's only two or three academic managers of color on the entire campus. I'm talking about my school. I know, and hey, I can start talking about y'all too, but I don't know y'all. So we got to tell the truth. We have to tell the truth about who we are so that we can disrupt the normative assumption about the institution that leads us to just simply tinker around the edges and say, you should be grateful to be here. I'm going to say this. I know I'm going on and on, but I got to say this, y'all. I have tissue on my desk in my office in Princeton for 20 years because students will come in and they would break down and it would be too late. They've already sunk academically. They've been in their dorm rooms alone. They didn't want to be revealed as somehow as an affirmative action baby, that they didn't have the capacities, or if they're not there, they're crying because they're in precept and they don't feel like they're as smart as the other kids. They're doubting themselves. And I said, they just using big words. They don't know the hell they're talking about. What's going on? Because the students are coming into Princeton believing that they should be thankful that they're there. They're not coming to Princeton feeling that it's their possession. Andover, am I preaching something to you?
A little bit.
They don't come in thinking that the school is yours. You come in, I'm so glad I'm here. Woo, my family, the trajectory of my family might change. I'm happy to be here. And so you're just thankful. You don't think that all of this stuff is yours. You're grateful. I said, no. So they get to crying. I give them a tissue. And I said, no, we got to flip this script. Well, what you mean, Dr. Glaude? What you mean? Oh, in the grand scheme of your life, Princeton is about this big. Princeton is in the service of your dreams. Flip the script. They should be grateful that you are here. Morehouse tried to kick me out 3 times. Now I'm one of their best alums. How do we, so as the institution, I know I'm getting carried away here, but if the institution assumes that it's normatively white, if it has an approach to students of color as that of charity or philanthropy, when we enter into these spaces, we don't feel a sense of possession. We feel instead gratitude, right? Then this institution stays exactly the way it is. It doesn't change. And then you feel like you're punching against brick walls.
Mm,
You feel me?
I feel you. I
So
feel you.
part of the change involves establishing metrics across the board, from admissions to faculty to staff to central admin to the board. It involves changing the culture. It involves leveraging your power, the power of Andover. Andover should be saying, anybody who's doing business with us, we need to see what your plan is. What business, minority businesses are you dealing with? You can leverage your power. You know, University of Chicago does it. Yale does it, right? If you're going to do business with us, we need to see the percentage of minority businesses you're dealing with. Because if we're going to change the world, we got to be as deliberate in getting rid of racial inequality as we were deliberate in creating it. I hope y'all, I must be getting, anyway.
So another question, and I know you know that all across schools there are sort of ideological struggles about the extent to which we should struggles around anti-racism in schools. And so one of the questions that we have from Nyla Dubois, class of 1994, is what are the limits of anti-racism? I guess when you're trying to introduce it into schools, to what lengths should schools go? Is there a limit to how far schools should go to implement anti-racism throughout the fabric of the schools? Is there a point at which it's gone too far?
You know, I don't tend to think about the question within the frame of anti-racism.
Okay.
Because anti-racism centers, folk, I don't need to be, you know, anti-racism doesn't speak to me, you know what I mean, right? So
what would you substitute for that? How would you discuss what anti-racism is trying to get at? Okay.
The truth.
Mm.
What does it mean to read notes of the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, alongside David Walker's appeal?
Mm.
What does it mean to engage in this kind of contrapuntal reading, to read the 1619 project over and against the 1776 project, right? In other words, how do we encounter to read Walt Whitman's Democratic Vistas and to read his op-eds in Brooklyn, to read Leaves of Grass, first edition all the way to the last edition. I mean, the first edition of Leaves of Grass is beautiful. It even has an anti-slavery abolitionist element in it. But did you know the last edition, he redacted it all out? He redacted that whole section out of the poem. Why? Because Whitman didn't believe post-emancipation that Black people should be accorded the benefits of citizenship. He thought we were barbarians who couldn't be citizens. We didn't have the capacity, the intellect. What does it mean to read Whitman in his fullness, right? What does it mean to understand Jefferson in his fullness? So anti-racism is really about how do we disabuse ourselves of the effects of the belief that white people matter more than others, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And so part of what are the limits to that? That's what the question is odd to me, because it's centered around, right, the comfort of folk who don't want to confront the truth of the matter. Right. So I don't, if I'm reading Emerson, I want to read Emerson's response to the fugitive slave law in 1850. That's the country. If I'm going to have a debate about immigration, I want to understand the national, origins formulation of 1924 and its response to the massive numbers of folk coming from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, Jews and Southern Italians, and how the current debate is really rooted in the Immigration Act of 1965 and a longing for, the national origins formula, which maintain a certain kind of homogeneity of American society. So the limits of anti-racism, it's like, let me tell Terry, it's like, what are the limits of exposing students to truth? exposing
Mm.
students to the complexity of human beings, of human doing and suffering. I don't know what that looks like as a teacher.
Yeah.
For me, that's like trying to take the N word out of Huckleberry Finn. That makes no damn sense to me. Right?
Yeah.
That's just me, you know. So I should say this, that the value of comfort is not a value that I hold when it comes to dealing with this question. We have to sit in a place of discomfort if we're going to imagine ourselves otherwise. So I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit more. That's
Okay.
was that just a visceral expression of my reaction to a question? Yeah.
John Reed, class of 1962, asks, how do you square racism with Christian values? And I would like to add to that, do you have faith in religious institutions to take us to the New Jerusalem?
It all depends, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But you know, Frederick Douglass said that the auction block was right next to the church steeple.
Mm.
America's Civil War happened within American Christendom before one shell was shot at Fort Sumter. It had already happened over the issue of slavery. Methodist North, Methodist South.
Mhm.
You had already had the splits happening in American Christendom. When we think about Black Christendom, for example, you know, Black Christianity emerges as a refutation of the idolatry of white Christianity, where the adjective mattered more than the noun. Howard Thurman, the great theologian who wrote Jesus and the Disinherited and a range of other texts, said that the slave dared to redeem the religion profaned in her midst. What did it mean that you had to have segregated cemeteries? What did it mean that Black folk had to sit in what they call the N-word pews, had to wait till all the white folks took their communion before they could take their own? What did it mean that Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, in the midst of St. George's Church praying at the altar, would suddenly be picked up in the middle of prayer and told to go to the N-word pews? And they walked out, and Richard Allen would go on to found African Methodist Episcopal Church. Every Black denomination except for one emerges out of a separation, a seeking of dignity, of the dignity of worship apart from racism, except one. And that's Kojic, Pentecostalism. White folk left that. It was initially integrated, then they left, you see. So American Christendom is fraught, overrun with the reality of race. But there's always that prophetic element running through across the railroad tracks on both sides. But remember, the prophetic note is always in the minor key. It's always in the minor key. You got to deal with the court prophets.
Yeah.
Over and over again. So the answer to the question is that I have faith that there are religious voices like Reverend Barbers, for example, doing that work. But we also have religion sanctifying the ugliness. January 6th, what did we see? What did we hear? We saw crosses and prayers, my Lord. So American Christendom is a wonderful example of the deep contradictions of the country.
Yeah.
Still the most segregated hour in the country.
Yes, and Isabel Wilkerson in Cass talks about how the use of religious tenets and texts have been used to justify, of course, oppression of peoples and the creation of the caste system. So yeah, certainly.
I would urge everyone to read James Cone's last book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. It's an extraordinary, I mean, he's a Black liberation theologian, so there's a particular ideological approach to it, but it's an extraordinary exposition of the complex relationship between race and Christianity in the country. Yeah.
So the great Janetta Tapia who facilitated a conversation with our own Julia Alvarez recently, asks, in these after times, what actions do you suggest for folks to take as we build coalitions and solidarity in the fight towards freedom? And I'm reminded of how dangerous that is, because that's what got Fred Hampton, into trouble, that building of that multiracial, multi-class coalition in Chicago, and how that turned out. So it's a dangerous prospect, but it's very important, and Baldwin would have said that. So how do we get there? How do we do that?
Yeah, Jesse Jackson gets that rainbow coalition from Fred Hampton.
Yep.
Right. So I'm trying to think about how to answer the question, because it can be, we have to be mindful of the two different levels at which the answer works, or the two different registers at which the answer works. I think we need a new moral and social contract that announces our obligations to each other. What does it mean to be together differently in this moment? That we should hold that nobody should lose their way because they're sick. That social and moral contract says that what defines our being together is that we got you. If you're sick, you're not gonna lose everything. That's we got you. Another feature of that, if you're working 40 hours a week, you should make a living wage. That you should be able to put food on the table, keep a roof over your head, and send your kids to college. We got you. We got you. Right? You shouldn't be barely surviving, right? We want to say that every child, no matter the color of their skin, no matter their zip code, no matter whether they live in rural or urban spaces, that they deserve an education that is of the quality of Andover. That you ain't got to just have money to get this kind of education. We want to commit ourselves to educating all of our children, something that America has never done in its entire history, even with its public education system. What does it mean to establish a new moral and social contract that announces our obligations to each other, right? All of which shorn of the value gap. But that's going to require of us something much more fundamental, that we run to our fears. We run towards them. We understand them. We confront what's at the root, what's in the gut. So how do we build solidarities with folks across these different divides? Well, I think Reverend Barber represents a wonderful example with the Poor People's Campaign, but we identify those issues that bring us out of our silos, that impact all of us, whether you are white in Appalachia or Black in the Delta of Mississippi, right? Or brown in the Rio Grande, right? That all of these spaces, right? Whether you're LGBT, trans, LGBTQ, all of these spaces, there are moments where we can come together to imagine a conception of the public good, but it's going to require first a level of maturity. That means that we have run towards our fears and dealt with them, honestly, if that makes sense. Because Baldwin says, I keep going back to him over and over again. Baldwin says that the messiness of the world is actually, this isn't Baldwin, this is me, but the messiness of the world is actually a reflection of the messiness of our interior lives. That we haven't dealt with the junk in here. And so that junkiness manifests itself in the way in which the world is organized. So the short answer to the question, Terry, is that I think we need to begin to build a new moral and social contract with each other that reflects, right, these three elements or four elements that I laid out, but it also assumes a level of self-reflection and introspection that it helps us become different kinds of people so that we can be together differently.
So, what of hope, Dr. Glaude? What of hope? Are you hopeful about the prospect of our reaching the New Jerusalem? What would, was Baldwin hopeful at the end of the civil rights movement? after he saw what had happened to it and its leaders and the apostle of love and fellow Morehouse man? What about hope?
So, you know, I'm a professor, so I had to reach for a book. I'm surrounded by books. In the last interview with Quincy Troop, November 1987, a month before Baldwin dies, before cancer takes him from us, he says this, and if I fall into tears, excuse me. He says, I was a witness, I thought. I was a very despairing witness, though. But I was right. I was right about what was happening in the country, what was about to happen to all of us, really, one way or another, and the choices people would have to make, and then watching people make them and denying them at the same time. I began to feel more and more homeless in terms of the whole relationship between France and me and America. And me has always been a little painful, you know, because my family's in America. I will always go back. It couldn't have been a question in my mind unless it absolutely really came to that. But in the meantime, you keep opening the door, you know. And the price of keeping the door open was to actually be, in a sense, victimized by my own legend. You know, I was trying to tell the truth, and it takes a long time to realize that you can't. There's no point in going to the mat, so to speak. No point in going to Texas again. There's no point in saying this again. It's been said, and it's been said, and it's been said. It's been heard and not heard. You're a broken motor. Yes, you're a running motor, and you're repeating, and it causes a breakdown. The lessening of willpower. And you realize you're not dealing with what's key. You're not dealing with how lonely you are. A month before he's dead. Keep repeating and repeating and repeating. Can't keep going to Texas. Can't keep interpreting the drums. Got to keep burying our babies. Got to keep grieving in public. Got to keep dealing with the willful ignorance. Got to keep dealing with the charity. Got to raise our babies in this. Keep them from despising themselves. Jimmy was not despairing, but he understood in those last days that hope is always fugitive. He said in 1970 that hope is invented every day.
Mm.
And if hope is invented every day, that means you're fighting off despair every day. You're fighting off the darkness every day. Because if you're dealing with the truth of the matter, you're dealing with darkness. So, hope, yeah, I got some. I ain't gonna tell you what's in this cup though. Hope, yeah, I have some. Baldwin says that, human beings are at once miracles and disasters.
Yeah.
We have to protect ourselves from the disasters that we've become, but we are, alas, we can be miraculous. If we show up, there's a chance for a miracle. Remember Toni Morrison's Nobel lecture?
Yeah.
With the blind woman and the young people who are trying to play a game on her? And she says, it's in your hand, baby. It's in your hand. That's where the hope resides. If I don't have faith in us, then what's the point? Right? What's the point? So, it's not about the end. It's about what Talib Kweli calls the beautiful struggle.
Mm.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Okay, so I have one final question or
Sure.
one thing that I want you to talk about before we move into the live Q&A part. There were some questions I didn't get to. I apologize for that, everyone that submitted them. But
Well, they're gonna be mad at you.
I know. They know where I live though. So I want you to talk to us about the importance of community and of finding one's elsewhere as we work towards a New Jerusalem.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. That chapter was I almost didn't write that chapter.
Oh, I'm so glad you did.
You know, because I was gonna retrace Baldwin's steps in Istanbul.
Mm.
And somebody said, "Have you lost your damn mind? You out here critiquing Trump, and you're gonna go to Erdogan's Istanbul? You might not make it back." Now, this was before Khashoggi, of course.
Yeah.
And so my editor was like, "Why don't you go and interview some activists?" And I was like, "No, we're always extracting something from them. Can I write something for them?" And that's where the Elsewhere chapter came from. We all have to find our elsewhere. Communities of love that allow us to laugh full belly laughs, right? To rage, to cuss at the top of our lungs. Over the last few weeks that I've had to be a commentator on television, I can't tell you how many times that I just wanted to let out a primal scream. Just answer a question with a big loud F-bomb. And then you come out of that space, and I have a little reading group that I've had for the last year or so. And it's a bunch of my friends from Morehouse, Ronald Sullivan and Ronald Sullivan, who teaches at Harvard Law, and Paul Taylor, who's the chair of the philosophy department at Vanderbilt, Chuck McKinney, who's the chair of the history department at Rhodes, Chuck Peterson, who's a philosopher at Oberlin, right? Mark Jefferson, who was the associate dean at Harvard Law, who's now at University of Virginia, and Cornell West. And we started with Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. And then we moved from that to some Chekhov and The Student. And then we read some Virginia Woolf and The Mark on the Wall. And then we turned to Toni Morrison, and we read some Richard Wright and some James Baldwin. And we just finished Jamaica Kincaid. And next week, we're going to go to Sylvia Wynter. And we all got our little.
You got to send us your reading list so we can have.
I'm so excited. You know, we're all going to be reading this new, you know, they got the new novel of the Man Underground, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we've been reading all this time, and we get together at 6 o'clock every 2 weeks, every Saturday, as busy as we are.
Mm-hmm.
Ronald Sullivan is one of the baddest defense lawyers in the country, right? Cornell West is Cornell West, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody got their little drink. We got our books, and we don't finish till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, laughing. One day we read Gwendolyn Brooks' last quatrain for Emmett Till. It threw us into such a loop. The next time we got together, we just played music. Everybody contributed 2 tracks, and we just listened to them together. So that elsewhere, that community of love, that when your knees buckle, they will stand and straighten your spine. Find those people who love you to death, who don't care that you're on television, who don't care that you went to Andover, who will tell you that you are getting new, who will love you in spite of yourself, that you know that you can be fully who you are with them. And they will replenish you. That allows you to rejoin the fray. If you ever get a chance, I'll say this really quick because we got to get to the questions.
Yep.
Look at this short film from Another Place with Jimmy Baldwin. It's Sadat Peké. It's him in Istanbul. And there's this moment, Jimmy's on the balcony, and someone calls his name, and they do something that he doesn't quite understand. So he turns around, and his brow is furrowed. And then suddenly his face explodes in this extraordinary smile. Sheer joy in the midst of extraordinary pain. Got him through. Oh, how I got over.
Wow. Dr. Glaude, it's been such a pleasure, and my conversation with you hopefully is not over forever. But for this moment in time, and I'm so grateful and thankful for your presence here. Thank you so much for blessing our community. And I'm going to turn it over now to Ruben Diaz and Terry Alexander, who are going to handle the live Q&A.
Oh Lord, what am I going to hear from these folks?
I
know.
Good evening, Dr. Glaude. My name is Ruben Diaz, class of '84, and Princeton, class of '88. Here's the question from Phyllis Jefferson. She asks, what should be said to the young people about the importance of race relations and white privilege, specifically white teenagers and young adults who have hatred at such a young age?
Well, we have to trouble race relations as a category. Comes out of the Chicago School of Sociology. There are a whole host of assumptions that we need to debunk there. What can we do? I'm just thinking about all those babies whose hearts are hardened already. What can we do? Slogans aren't going to do the work. White privilege, anti-racism, race relations, slogans aren't going to do the work. I don't know what we can say, Ruben.
Mhm.
How can we love them into a different way of being in the world? Right? What does it mean to exemplify for those young people who have come of age in a moment of catastrophe? In so many ways, these young folk are the catastrophic generation. They've come of age in the midst of catastrophe layered upon catastrophe. They know the country's broken, and some are reaching for old languages like fascism, and some are reaching for progressive languages. So what does it mean to love them in the midst of the catastrophic and to model a different way of being in the world? I can't do that. I'm just going to say, I can't do that. I don't, that's not my place. Somebody else is going to have to do that. Somebody else is going to have to love them into a different way of being into the world. I only have a finite amount of civic energy. I can't use it there. But I think you got to love those babies into a different way of being in the world, because someone hated them into being into who they are now.
Okay, well, thank you, thank you.
Sure.
And next we'll hear from Terry Alexander.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Glaude. You've given us so much to think about this evening and really just extending your thoughts. We really appreciate this. And we have one final question before we turn it over to Lily Lewis, who will lead us with another performance. And thanks to everyone who chatted in questions.
I'm sorry, I talked too much.
Well, we really appreciate it. So the final question is actually very related to what you were just talking about. And this one comes from Bobby Edwards, a very dear member of our community. And he'd like for you to speak a little bit about the well of Black people's forgiveness. And he quotes a Harvard professor who says, "How long must America count on the bottomless well of Black people's forgiveness?" And wants to hear your thoughts on how deep that well should go.
Well, it has to be deep. I pray that it's infinite. I'm gonna give you all a secret. White folks often misunderstand our forgiveness. Like many things, they think it's about them. It's not. We have to forgive for our sake. Because if we don't, then hatred will overrun everything. And then we would become monstrous. The forgiveness is the cultivation of the soul. And I pray that that's infinite. You know, even there's a moment in 1968 in the Esquire magazine when there's an interviewer who is interviewing Jimmy, and the interview is just horrible. We revisited that interview recently for an Esquire issue. And the interviewer is asking Jimmy's questions, and Jimmy's just firing back in classic style. I write about this in Begin Again. But he says, what would you tell those young people who are burning down cities now? And he says, well, I wouldn't tell them not to pick up the gun. This is like June of 1968. King was murdered April 68. So I wouldn't tell them not to pick up the gun. I would tell them that if they gotta blow the man's brains out, and it may come to that, not to hate, not to hate. Because there's nothing useful that could come from that. At that moment, Jimmy is actually preaching to the soul maintenance, right? Forgiveness. It's about keeping the hate at arm's length. Because my Lord, if we let it loose, we're lost. So I pray that the well of forgiveness is infinite. I pray that it's infinite.
Well, I have to be clear that I'm 100% with you on that, Dr. Glaude. You actually invoked my great granddaddy. You brought up Absalom Jones. I'm in a direct line with Absalom Jones. I'm in a direct line of folks who over and over again decided to stay in the church instead of breaking off, not because we didn't understand why the breakoff had to occur and the value there, but also because we understood that if we can't figure out how to occupy space together, if we can figure out how to recover genuinely the soul of the nation, we will not survive. We actually will not survive. I think and I don't mean Black people, I mean people. I mean that the disease that this country has inherited and now is disseminating when it comes to the worth gap, it's out to get us. It's out to get us. And there are days when I wake up knowing that our ability to forgive is kind of the only thing holding things together. I'm convinced of that. So I am infinitely thankful of the time that we have shared here together this evening, and I'm more than honored to get to close this out with a little bit of hopeful melody, although I will admit that I have had to abandon all hope in order to get to work. I realized that, I was burning a lot of calories on hope, when really I wanted to figure out how to recapture that energy to get to work. I think it dispels my illusions. It gives me a sober eye, and it allows me to see things as that's my path for seeing things as clearly as I can in a lot of the ways in which you've laid out for us tonight, Dr. Glaude. So I'm just infinitely thankful to have shared this time, and I'm gonna sing about hope because I put it in the melodies these days. My American heart, my American heart, my American heart is love with the fire in the promise of tomorrow. I'll speak my story, I'll sing my song. My American heart is love with the fire in the promise of tomorrow.
a soldier in the army. It's an infantry of God. We are reaching towards tomorrow, and we mean to break the odds. We are marching for the children, for the mothers, for the land. We will build a new beginning with every soul who dares to stand. Have not the pious promise makers taken back every word they've said? Blood by fire, burning upon the cross. Have not the pale moons turned to red? But we must ever believe in truth. Truth is still that regal thing, and there ain't no rest. Say there ain't no rest. No, there ain't no rest for a king. Yes, yeah. If we are all the great journeys, then the journey is our grace. We must never surrender, no, we're in the victory of our faith. And if my body dies before me, let the bells of freedom ring. I will be born again in freedom. 'Cause there ain't no rest for a king. Say there ain't no rest. Oh, there ain't no rest. No, there ain't no rest for the king.
I will clap for all of y'all on here. Thank you, Lily Lewis, for blessing us this evening. Thank you to everyone who made this night possible. Linda Carter Griffith, Jenny Savino, Yvette Garcia, the entire Af-Lat-Am Alumni Committee, particularly Carolyn Chica, Ruben Diaz, Terry Stroud, Pastor 88, for doing an amazing job moderating this evening. Dr. Glaude, we can't thank you enough. Sometimes, in our worlds, because of our various positions, we may not feel empowered to speak our truths as loud and as clear with as much power and time and space they deserve. But having you with us this evening, speaking those truths that many of us feel, and believe it means more than you'll ever know. So please, all folks like you who sit brave, fearless, and in positions of particular power, keep speaking those truths for the many of us who may not be able to speak them as loudly and as powerfully as you do. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to anyone I may have missed, but this truly was all about our community. This came from a desire to give us a little bit of hope, a little bit of vision, a little bit of direction, so that we can come together in the spirit of truth. One of our mottos is knowledge and goodness. And I can't say enough how many times I say, man, we're really good at this knowledge, but can we get a little bit better at our goodness? Living it out in all ways possible. So thank you to everyone who spent the night with us. Lily Lewis, you can feel free if you want to keep on going, it's up to you, but I just thank everyone for being here this evening. Thank you so, so much. And again, thank you.
You guys can unmute if you want to say anything, share the space.
Thank you to LaShawn Springer, Bobby Edwards, man, so many folks. Diane Borges.
Eddie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Chris Leggett.
Hi, Chris Leggett.
Hey, Eddie.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Great, man. Absolutely brilliant as usual. And if you can believe this, I wrote my senior thesis 45 years ago on Black religion as a rejection of white Christianity during the antebellum period in American history. And I was a pre, if you can believe that. And it was graded by Cornell West and 2 other readers. But
Wow.
I look at your background, and I was asking myself throughout your comments, how long would it take me to read all those books, and how I could embark on a reading session that would get me to the point where you are. And I just like to say for the public, the one thing I love most about Dr. Glaude is that he is enormously popular, prominent, and successful, yet he has remained humble with incredible humility, and he has never fallen for the trap to be captured by his own self-adulation. And because he's able to keep Christ first, I think the Lord can bless him, and I'm very proud of him.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I get y'all ain't gonna have me in here crying. I'm gonna be good. This has been beautiful. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everybody.
You're gonna make me go back and get a PhD in Black Studies, man.
We're gonna have to get us a reading group, an Andover reading group, and we
That's
can get it
right.
going,
That's right.
That's what we're gonna do. Well, I appreciate y'all.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Leslie.
Take care. Be safe, buddy.
Y'all take care now. Be safe.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Great to see you all.